Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ethics Second Part 2 ethics session that we're having called Doing the Right Thing. We have a lot to discuss this morning, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Because we are providing ASHA CEUs, I just have to make the financial disclosure. And learner outcomes, ASHA has them written in past tense now. So our learner outcomes would be that you describe the ethical decision-making model and applied that model to dilemmas submitted anonymously by SLPs working in West Virginia schools. So all of these situations and dilemmas we'll be discussing this morning are actual situations that have happened with therapists across the state. Everyone at one time or another is going to face an ethical dilemma. And what we're going to find out, what we found out last time, and I think what we'll find out today, is there's not always just one solution to the problem. So what we're going to talk about is the way, organized way that you can go through and make a determination about how to handle it. ASHA every year gets approximately 3,000 ethics inquiries, and most of the inquiries are based on use and supervision of support personnel, and we're going to discuss one of those issues today. Cultural competence, reimbursement for services, professional versus business ethics, and clinical fellowship supervision. ASHA Code of Ethics in Principles of Ethics 4, Rule M says individuals with evidence that Code of Ethics have been violated have the responsibility to work collaboratively to resolve the situation where possible or to inform the Board of Ethics through its established procedures. Remember that not doing anything is indeed a decision, and that's from Lisa Power Defer, because it leaves things as they are. So I want to point out the fact that the ASHA Code of Ethics say to try to work collaboratively to resolve the situation. So every situation that we're going to talk about today is not an immediate call ASHA and follow their procedures for reporting the ethics violation to ASHA, because in a lot of these cases, in most of these cases, you can work with your team that you're involved with and the people that are involved in the situation and come to a good solution without having to involve ASHA. We also want to point out that because you're school employees, we are supposed to abide by the West Virginia Department of Education's Policy 5902 Employee Code of Conduct. And part of that Code of Conduct is that we're required to respond immediately and consistently to incidents of bullying, harassment, intimidation, substance abuse, and or violence. And that can either impact students in a manner that effectively addresses the incidents, and we have to deter future incidents and affirm respect for individuals. And in some cases, I think that the situations that were possibly described in the dilemmas we're going to discuss today, it sounds like someone needs to mute. In those situations, I'm sure that the person in that situation can at times feel intimidated. So just remember that that's something we have to take in consideration as well as we're discussing these things. We also have to provide the opportunity for students to achieve at the highest levels. We have to immediately intervene in any code of conduct violation.
Stop.
Sorry, I hear someone who's not muted. If you could please mute, that way we won't hear any personal conversations you don't want us to hear. We appreciate it. Thank you. And we have to comply with federal and West Virginia laws, policy, regulations, and procedures. And for us, one of those regulations is Policy 2419. That is the only regulation or law that West Virginia Department of Education, Office of Federal Programs and Support, Special Education Services has. Everything else that we have is a guidance document. We provide our best guidance as far as how we think things should be handled. But Policy 2419 should be adhered to because it does follow the federal regulation of IDEA. And just one more reminder, I apologize, is all school employees are and related service providers are mandated reporters. If you suspect any child is in danger, it's our responsibility to report that. The way we're going to approach these dilemmas today is to discuss the ethical dilemma, and then we're going to go through the 5-step decision-making process that was referenced by Lisa Power Defer, and she is the one, she did an ethics session at the West Virginia Speech and Hearing Association convention a couple of years ago. But we used her 5-step process when we did our last ethics session. So you'll be kind of familiar with how we go through the process. Because I can't see the chat box and that kind of thing, if you guys could post questions in the chat box at the end of the discussion of each ethical dilemma, then Libby's going to monitor those for me and then ask the questions so we can discuss them before we move on to the next dilemma. This is a summary page that you're going to see right after we've presented the ethical dilemmas. And this is just a summary of the 5-step process. So the first step is to gather data, gather information, because we may not know all the information related to the situation. And we need to be aware of both sides of the story. We need to identify whether this is a moral, ethical, or legal dilemma. And then we need to consult resources. And those resources could include Policy 2419, IDEA, the SLP or SLPA guidance document, ASHA Code of Ethics. And you can also reach out to knowledgeable individuals. And they even suggest, I think in the next slide, that we have our own personal advisory board, people that we trust and that we know have a good understanding of things, and we can reach out to them too for advice. And that's all we do in step 3, is gather all that information. So, excuse me, once we have made all those decisions, we can brainstorm solutions. And all ideas should be considered, because we can always throw out the ideas that we don't want to use with step 5, but in step 4, you're just brainstorming. So a lot of times the best idea comes out as something that you really thought might not be possible when it was first considered. So when we're gathering information, we can't assume that we have all the information. We have to watch for personal predisposition or bias. And, you know, in some of these cases, there is a possibility of that happening. So I think that's always important to consider. We have to look for all perspectives. And without all the information, you can definitely misunderstand the situation. In step 2, we identify if it's a moral, legal, or ethical issue. If it's a moral issue, it bothers you, and that could mean it's just a moral issue. Oftentimes, it's based on the individual's personal moral code. And I think you'll see that some of these situations could definitely be that. If it's an ethical issue, then you need to refer to the ASHA's Code of Ethics, refer to ASHA's resources on Code of Ethics, and refer to West Virginia Department of Education policy, and refer to the West Virginia Board of Examiners. If it's a legal issue, that means the law or regulation's been violated, then you want to refer to IDEA or Policy 2419. You could examine the West Virginia Department of Education guidance in the guidance documents that have been provided. If it's a Medicaid issue, you would check the BMS manual. You could look at licensure requirements and credentialing requirements through the Department of Ed if that's one of your questions. And you could, if you think there's a confidentiality issue, you could look at, of course, at the HIPAA and FERPA regulations. Step 3 is the research phase, and that's when you consult with individuals. You can consult with organization representatives, seek wise advice. An example of how I seek wise advice is if I have a question about anything regarding AAC, I contact Karen Haynes or Carrie Childers at Marshall. because I know they have read all the relevant research, they're up on everything, and they have the experience to provide a wise opinion to me. Don't assume that you can accurately interpret the policies, laws, and regulations during this research phase, and it is helpful to have a personal advisory board. I think you're going to find this step out pretty quickly today as we go through these situations. There is very seldom a single solution. There might be several things that you can come up with during your brainstorming session that you want to act upon to handle the situation, and that's fine. I mean, that's great. If you can figure out a couple of things that you can do that will be helpful, then that is going to help get your solution that much faster. And it's important to take time to develop a variety of solutions, including the crazy ones, because that might generate other solutions as you're thinking through the process. And then step 5 is you want to pick one or more options of the brainstorming solutions you came up with, and you want to choose the ones that you think are most likely to succeed, but also ones that will help prevent future problems, and one that all parties agree on, and consider unintended consequences or negative repercussions. And that's one thing that I really found out when I came to the Department of Education, is that one single statement or one single decision can have unanticipated consequences that, you know, you definitely didn't want to have occur because of your decision. So be sure to think out that process too. You know, if I take this action, what possibly could happen because of that? And I think it's really important to stop and think about that as you make your final determinations. All right, since we've gone through this process before, we're just going to jump right into the dilemmas. We're not going to go through and talk about a dilemma as an example. So with dilemma 1, it says, what should you do if you know there's a therapist who only recommends 120 minutes per month for any student who qualifies for therapy regardless of their severity? And, you know, there are a lot of reasons for considering this one, and we're going to go ahead and take this one through the process. When we think about the 5-step decision-making process, we're going to gather data, so we make sure we understand everything about the situation before we move any further. We're going to determine whether it's a moral, ethical, or legal dilemma. We're going to consult resources, and that means do some research and reach out to thoughtful or knowledgeable individuals. We're going to brainstorm solutions, and then we're going to select one or more solution. So as we're gathering data, what I tried to do was go through and think about some of the information that you could try to gather. And excuse me, I'm so sorry. For some of the situations, you're going to find that there is more information to gather than others. So with this one, you know, one of the things I think you need to consider before you move further or report someone for only recommending 120 minutes a month, no matter the severity. And I guess we need to talk about why that's an issue. The reason that's an issue is because IDEA and Policy 2419 says that everything for a student should be individualized. If we're recommending the same treatment, amount of time, and frequency for every student, then we're not individualizing our services. Now, I understand why that's being done because, you know, I used to do it too. You get into the habit of, you know, if a student has articulation errors, you recommend the same amount of time for all of them. But when you get into having a diverse caseload, that should vary. So we're going to walk through this process and see what we can do here. So if you haven't seen all the IEPs to know that that's only time that that therapist recommends, then you really don't have all the factual knowledge that you need to you know, make a report. But, you know, if you have that suspicion, that's just one of the things you can look for. Is there a personal bias against this particular therapist? And, you know, we're all human, and there could be times that, you know, are always going to be personality conflicts with some people, and that happens. It's just human nature. But to use that as a reason for trying to pursue an ethical violation on someone or a legal violation, we really need to make sure that we ruled that out, that we're being as unbiased as possible. So if the reason that you want to do it is because you're aggravated because they only recommend the same goals, they recommend the same treatment time, and you get all their students and you resent that, then that's not a real reason to move forward. So make sure that you can take out that bias out of the situation. What's the SLP's perspective for why she does that? So, you could talk to the therapist and say, why do you only recommend 120 minutes a month, no matter the severity of the student? And we all can kind of figure out pretty quickly that a student who has apraxia or a student who requires augmentative communication is probably going to need more time than a student who's working on our tech, or even a student who has a phonological process disorder. Those students typically require more time than a student who's only working on S and R. So when we gather that information, then we have to make the determination before we move forward. Has the situation been misunderstood? Did you talk to the therapist and they had a reasonable explanation for it? Or are all of their students the same as far as how, the eligibility and prognosis? So, make sure to gather that information before you move on to step 2. Now with step 2, you're going to work through the 5-step process by determining whether or not there's a moral, ethical, or legal issue. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to have you vote using a Padlet. And with the Padlets, I'm going to pull them up right here so you can see it. And if you can see down here in my tray at the bottom, I have on my internet browser, I have the access to this Padlet. Libby has placed the code to this Padlet in your chat box. You don't have to download anything to use it. You just have to click on that Padlet, and you can see that there are plus signs down here. And all you're going to do is go into this one and say, just put your initials where you think it is, what you think it is, and then click outside of your note. And this is going to give us a list of how people vote. So when you're through with that, when you've made your vote, then you're going to use your tray down here at the bottom and go back to Teams so you can see my screen again. But leave that Padlet open. Don't click on the X up here. Just leave it open so you can access it again, because we're going to access it 2 more times. I can see people are voting. We appreciate it. This is a really simple tool, but it lets us know, how you feel about the situation, and gives us some feedback, since I can't see everyone and have you raise your hands and that kind of thing. So thank you for taking the time to do that. Excuse me. So looking on down through here, it looks like there are ethical votes by the majority of the people. So that's good. I think ethical is a very good choice for this one. But I think you can understand too that it very well may be a legal issue. It may be because there is a violation of policy 2419 in IDEA, but not individualizing. So a lot of these cases can be more than one, it can be more than one issue. It can be immoral and illegal. It can be legal and ethical. And I think this one definitely is ethical, definitely, but I think it can also be considered a legal issue too. So thank you for doing that. Be sure and leave this open. Don't click the X on it. I'm just going to minimize mine right now to get back to my screen, but you're going to click down here where the Teams icon is in your tray, and then that should bring you back to where we are now with my screen. So with that one, let's see, that just tells you to keep those open. And we have narrowed down that we think this type of issue is an ethical one. It's against the code of ethics. So now we're ready to move on to step 3. And with step 3, we're going to work through the 5-step process. And I did not go through and find passages for IDEA and policy 2419 for this one, because I think everyone understands that individualization, the very name of the IEP, Individualized Education Program, means that it's supposed to be made on the required. It's supposed to be designed based on the needs of that student, and every student does not have the same needs as far as time requirements for sessions. So one of the reasons I'm glad that we're discussing this is I think this happens a lot in counties, and I think people do it without even realizing that it could be an ethical or legal issue. So when you make recommendations for your therapy services, be sure and consider exactly what that child needs. And if they need more than 1 or 2 half-hour sessions a week, then they should receive it. And be sure and offer it not based on your schedule. And never, ever say to a parent that I know your child needs more time, but I don't have time in my schedule to provide it, because that is not something we're allowed to do. Excuse me. We have to write that IEP based on the student's needs. And even if it takes the county having to pay for private therapy and to make up the difference or whatever, that's a discussion that you have with your county and with your lead therapist if you have one, or your special ed director. That is not a discussion you have with the parent. You write that determination, that recommendation for time based on the student's need when you're writing the IEP. Well, now we're going to brainstorm some solutions. And so Libby is going to, again, give you the code in the chat box, and we're going to go to the brainstorming section this time. And what you're going to do is just hit this plus sign down here and then write in what you think the answer should be. And it can be crazy. It can be, it can be that you're just not going to do anything. It can be a lot of things, but be sure and write in one statement about what you think the best solution is, and then we'll look at them and discuss them. I'm not seeing anything come up. Oh, there they are. Mine was hiding it. I'm sorry. You guys are good. I'm glad you're coming up with all these solutions. That's great. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and start reviewing some of these and talking about what we're seeing here. Excuse me. And then we will move on to the next step. One of them says, look at the student's needs and discuss with other therapists to determine how much time they would need to address the goals. Have a conversation with the therapist regarding 2419 and gain information on how she determines therapy minutes for students. Ask the therapist why she chose that amount of time and consider student compliance, student progress, and student needs. talk to the therapist. Time for each student may be the same, but deliver for various reasons. That's exactly right. All these are really good. Talk to the therapist and then the director. Review 2419 with the therapist, discuss individual needs of the students. Talk with therapist first. One of them says I would meet with the therapist and discuss each student's therapy depending on each individual. I would talk directly with the SLP to understand her perspective and then collaborate with all SLPs for consistency in how we differentiate instruction. You guys, these are all great solutions. They really are. And I see that one of them says after talking to the therapist directly, I would talk to the lead therapist and bring them into the discussion. So these are all great solutions. They're great solutions. And, we could do several of these, honestly. So we'll go back to some of these at the top. Talk with the therapist. I don't see anything that says, I like this one, have a friendly chat with the therapist. I like that. But you see that none of them say report them for code violations and that kind of thing. So I think that's important that you guys are figuring out ways to collaboratively work through the dilemma, and that's exactly what ASHA tasks us to do. Okay.
And Leanne, some people are having trouble, and I think Cassie, you have a good point. If because there's so many wonderful solutions, it could be that you're not seeing that plus and the pink thing at the bottom, or it could be that when your Padlet or your Post-it note appears, it might not be where you think it's going to be. So,
all over the place.
But so if you are having trouble, just go ahead and put it in the chat box. That's fine too. But this way we can get, a lot of people. If a chat box is hard to follow when there's 100 of you, but we're seeing some, and Leanne can see this as well. So anyway, if you're having trouble, we apologize. But I think that might be part of the issue is there's so many that we're the place to click to add your Post-it may be either covered or it's the Post-it is way down on the screen, because this is a very full screen and this is great. It's great seeing everybody's feedback.
Thank you, Libby. Yeah, this is the first time we've tried to use these Padlets, and I like the concept of it. It is wonderful for me to be able to see your all's ideas. And if I had time, I'd go through and put hearts on all of them. But thank you for the input and give us the feedback, so we can make sure that this is not a frustrating activity that we're doing with you. So now I'm going to go back to my tray and click on Teams and get back to where we were. Share my screen again. And now that we've brainstormed the ideas, the next thing we're going to do is go through the solutions. One of the solutions that we thought you guys might say would be to talk with the lead SLP, talk with the special education director, talk with the therapist in question, or ignore the situation. And you guys chose the first three. I mean, that's basically what you said to do. So ignoring the situation here again means that you're saying that what's happening is okay. The only thing that I think that could be an unanticipated consequence here, and I think it's how you handle it. That's the reason I like the comment about the friendly chat, is the fact that, the therapist might feel as if you're reporting her to the lead or to the director. So I think having a friendly chat with her first is important. But what you're trying to do too at this point is protect the therapist and the county, because if the federal monitors come in and they're checking service times and they see that all students, no matter severity, no matter what issues the student, no matter what eligibility the student has, and no matter what the goals say, they all have the same amount of time, then they're going to pick up on the fact that there's an issue there. So you're trying to prevent issues later on down the road for the therapist and for the county. So I think that's a good way to approach it as we move forward. So So you guys know what you would do, and we're going to go on to the next dilemma. The next one is I'm recommending an AAC evaluation for a student who has severe apraxia and is unable to effectively communicate with her teachers and peers. Parent emphatically said no after 3 attempts. What's next? And honestly, this happens, unfortunately, a lot of times. And there could be several reasons for that. But number one, I'm glad that you're considering AAC for a student with apraxia, because even though you're working with them on that apraxia and you're addressing that in your IEP, they still need a way to effectively communicate and access their educational environment. So I'm really glad that you're considering AAC for this situation. We're going to go through the 5-step process again and see if we can figure out how to possibly handle this situation. In the first phase of gathering information, we want to try to figure out why the parent's refusing. And honestly, there could be a lot of reasons. I've had this happen several times because I used to do AUGCOM evaluations for Kanawha County, and I used to do a lot of my own. I had a lot of students with autism the last several years. I only worked with students with autism who were nonverbal. So I ran into this a lot. And, you know, a lot of times it's because parents are afraid that you're giving up on their child's speech. And, you know, we can all understand that, because if we had a nonverbal child, we would definitely want them to be able to use speech just to be like everybody else. And because that's going to be the most efficient and make them fit in the best. But we all understand that there's a reason that we have to consider AUGCOM for students who are nonverbal or minimally verbal. Parents don't have that luxury. And, you know, in a lot of cases too, they may have just gotten diagnoses. If we're talking about a 3 or 4-year-old, they may have just gotten a diagnosis, you know, pretty, you know, currently, and they may not have dealt with all that yet. With a student with apraxia, sometimes it's really hard to hear that your child has a neurological issue. So, you know, saying that you want to use AUGCOM, I think a lot of times makes parents think that the SOP is giving up on my child as far as producing speech, and that is not the case here. You know, you're going to continue to do your therapy addressing the apraxia, which, you know, we know is different than just doing normal artic therapy. And hopefully you're going to be giving them the appropriate amount of time to work on that, because once a week, twice a week isn't going to really make the change that we need to see for those students. But trying to incorporate AUGCOM, you know, the parent might also think that that's going to prohibit them from talking, you know, that they're going to see that AUGCOM is so much easier and they can just reach over and touch a button and that will take care of things. Well, you know, we all know that that's not true, but parents, you know, you can definitely see why they would think that, because honestly, there are still some SLPs out there that think that. So they're also afraid that their child will look different and that they'll stand out. And, you know, we all want our children to be included and not feel different. So, you know, you can understand why a parent would have those hesitancies. And is there a personal bias? You know, the parent, I know that one situation that I can think of specifically where I think the parent, for whatever reason, didn't trust me, didn't think that I was giving her child. It wasn't that I wasn't recommending AUGCOM, it was the fact that she thought the AUGCOM I was recommending was too low for her child. But it was based on a language evaluation and everything. But still, you know, you can see where sometimes the parent would refuse something that you recommend if they don't trust you. And so we definitely need to go through and determine if you know, if the refusal is happening because of any of those issues. And we also want to look at the history of speech services. We want to determine whether or not we've used evidence-based techniques and whether we've had the appropriate service delivery, which is going to include the amount of time that we provide for therapy. Once we've gathered that information, then we're going to determine whether this is a moral, ethical, or legal issue. So what we're going to do again is go to your Padlet. Oops. And we're going to vote whether it's a moral, legal, or ethical issue. It looks like ethical is edging out legal by a couple of votes here. Libby, is anyone voting in the chat box?
Someone asked if they could vote for two things, and I think you can, because it can be more than one.
Absolutely.
And then someone said that's a difficult question because I think it spills over into both ethical and legal. Yep. Okay.
Well, and that's the nice thing about walking through this process, going through this process and really giving careful consideration to determine whether or not what type of issue it is, because, excuse me, it can be a couple of different issues, just like we can come up with a couple of different solutions. So absolutely. Okay, so now it looks like ethical has definitely taken over the legal votes, but you guys are exactly right. It can be both. It can definitely be both, because ethically we're supposed to recommend what the child needs, provide the services that they need, and legally we're also supposed to provide the services that the student needs to access their educational environment. And if they can't communicate effectively with their classroom teacher and the other students in their room, then they can't do that. So you guys are right on top of it. Okay. Now we're on step 3. We could consult policy 2419 for parent refusal, because they do have the right to do that. We could locate parent articles for AAC myths. We could discuss AAC device to practice language skills that can be practiced when you have limited, that need to be practiced when you have limited verbal output, but average receptive language. So we can get information to provide to the parent to let them know, the different, to maybe allay some of the fears that they have. If we found out that that's the reason they're refusing. And as far as policy 2419 is concerned, I think that's for us to know what our rights are as far as moving forward if a parent refuses. So we're going to look at 2419 right now. And if the parent either fails to respond or doesn't sign the evaluation request, then the evaluation using mediation or filing a due process complaint can happen if a county would choose to do that. The district may seek mediation or due process if the student's enrolled in or seeking enrollment in a public school. So the fact that a parent has informed consent, you're providing that when you provide them with all the information we just discussed, like the AAC myths and the fact that AAC does not prohibit them from using language, for gaining language and using speech. So all of those different concepts can, hold on one second. Well, I can't do it. So those types of things we need to really consider, that we've met our due diligence as far as providing all that information. And then if the parent still refuses, then we want to think about the solutions we could possibly offer or think about. And we're going to do that by using the Padlet for brainstorming. And as Libby said, if you can't see the plus sign down here, once people start posting, you can also post in the chat box, and she'll give me those summaries as I look here on this page for your comments. So please take a minute and write what you think is the possible solution. I'm going to go ahead and start trying to say some of these because they do come in fast and then I lose where I am on the screen. I saw someone said they would go ahead and use AAC in the classroom. Parent education, use alternative communication in the system I'm assuming they're meaning in the classroom. I would provide parents with the appropriate resources. Um, Ask parents to come to a meeting to discuss the issue and hopefully help them see the positives. Talk with parents and provide handouts, links, and websites and articles if they're interested in research. I would use AAC in the classroom as part of a total communication approach. Ask the parent to come in for a meeting to discuss, and several people have that. I would attempt to get their feelings behind their choice. I would have talked to the parent and try to establish a relationship. Maybe let them observe AAC use for permission, of course. So all of these are very good suggestions. And Libby, do you have any in the chat box that you want to say for us?
I have one says perhaps having a committee gather, which could include, among others, the lead SLP and or others for a discussion. That was Vicki. And then Kathy Collins said, invite the parent to be part of a session and use picture cues, loaner device to show parent what you are intending and ask for their perspective. And Maria Akers says, talk to the parent, show examples of AAC in the classroom.
Okay. I think these are all really good solutions. All the ones that you're listing here and all the ones that were listed in the chat box are all great things to try. The one thing that I would say, if a parent has been very adamant about not using AAC with their child, I would not go ahead and take it in the classroom. Number one, you need to recommend AAC based on a language evaluation. So, whatever you take in the classroom may not be exactly what the student needs. And if you demonstrate AAC to the parent without doing an evaluation, it may be difficult because the system may not fit them. You may aim too high or too low. So I think all these things about saying that meet with the parent, demonstrate what you're talking about, talking to them about the fact that this way their child can at least participate in classroom discussions and that kind of thing. I think those are all really good ideas, but just make sure that you're respecting the parent's wishes as far as, using the AAC. Now, there have been times that I've tried AAC in the past with students first to see how they did with it, but I never mentioned it in the classroom. I can remember I would have without the parent knowing about it. But a lot of times when I would go do evaluations in the county I was in, I would talk to the classroom teacher and to the parent, and they would not have known that the SLP was even using any AUGCOM at all. So having a parent up in that loop is important because that's how you establish that trust too. So, just kind of keep that in mind. And then I see there's also a suggestion here about using something less technical, like Microsoft Word text to speech. Those are all great options. You guys are great. And you know exactly, what needs to be done in this situation. So, like I said, just remember that parent needs to be in the loop. And so these are some of the solutions that I had come up with. Talk to the parent with articles, use AAC during therapy sessions to practice language, talk with your special education director or lead SLP if you really feel like, you need to go through mediation for it and to leave the situation alone for now. And the only reason that might be a viable solution is, sometimes if parents feel like they're being pressured, then they're not going to be able to hear. All they're going to be hearing is you're pressuring me. So sometimes just letting it go, not go, but letting it lie for a little bit and then trying to call them in for a meeting and demonstrate what you're talking about, and just telling them, I know when I talked to you about AAC, that was kind of overwhelming and I didn't even tell you what we were thinking about using, and I'd like to just show you what it is and how we would use it and that kind of thing. Sometimes just giving them that processing time is all it takes. So, giving up on the situation, I don't think is a good viable option, but leaving it alone for right now might be. Okay, so you guys know what you would do, and all of the things that you wrote in the chat box and in the on the screen were in the Padlet were excellent suggestions. You guys rock, I tell you. So dilemma 3, I'm going to read this one just because I want to make sure you understand the situation. A school was assigned an SLPA to provide speech therapy services. The existing speech language pathologist at the school was assigned to supervise the SLPA. Because the supervising SLP still did have a full caseload, the SLPA was told by the SLP that the SLP would not be able to provide the required supervision hours to the SLPA. Okay, that right there should be the end of this situation as far as we need to act on that one right away. So it goes on to say that SLPA was also permitted to perform other tasks outside their scope of practice, such as dismissing students from services and writing IEP goals without the input of the supervising SLP. The SLPA felt obligated to perform these duties, even though they knew it was not meeting West Virginia Department of Ed standards due to pressure from the school and county. Unfortunately, this is a real situation. And unfortunately, I think it probably happens more than we realize. And there are a lot of reasons it happens. You know, a lot of times the special ed director isn't aware that it's happening. You know, it's happening amongst the therapist and they don't know that that's going on. Sometimes, you know, because of fear of retribution and that kind of thing, SLPAs are afraid to speak up. You know, because, you know, this is a newly hired SLPA and all of a sudden she's coming in and complaining. But I'm thinking we can work through this and figure out a solution. We're going to go through the 5-step process again. And with this, when I was trying to think about what information we could gather, the only information that I could think that we could gather to make sure we had all the information was the supervising SLP's schedule, because she says she has a full caseload. She doesn't have time to do the supervision. But you know what we're going to find as you go through this 5-step process is sometimes you do have all the information. You understand the situation completely and you don't have to gather anything else. So with that in mind, we're going to decide whether this is a moral, legal, or ethical issue. And you are going to vote again. And this is the last time, so just vote what you think this is. I see some people are voting all 3 or voting for more than one. That's absolutely fine.
I'm seeing legal and ethical in the chat box.
Okay, so it looks like legal and ethical are pretty well tied here as far as the number of votes that I can see. There's so many that, you know, the slide bar, I can't see them all on the screen at one time. And the moral issue is the fact that it makes us feel uncomfortable. The reason it makes us feel uncomfortable is because we know it's not right. It's not legally or ethically correct to do that. So let's go ahead and move on through this. So what we would do at this point is research, and we would look at SLPA guidance document from the state. We would review ASHA's Code of Ethics, consult with the lead SLP, consult with the Personal Advisory Board, and I also should have put on there consult with Special Education Director and consult with the West Virginia Department of Education Coordinator. So according to the SLPA guidance document, these activities are clearly outside the scope of practice or scope of responsibilities of the SLPA. Writing IEPs to develop or write or modify students' IEP, signing formal documents, or dismissing a student from service. Those are all outside the scope of practice of the SLPA. So that clearly is something that shouldn't happen. And honestly, even though our document is a guidance document, the reason we're providing that guidance is because it is an ethical issue. And we don't want counties to be in situations where they're doing something unethically. It's important to remember that guidance document is written for a reason, and this is it. It also says that the supervising SLP retains legal and ethical responsibility for all students served. So whether or not that SLP is supervising, is doing anything with those students, when something happens with that student, that SLP is legally responsible for that student and ethically responsible. So that's something that they definitely need to consider when they say they don't have time to provide the supervision. They're supposed to make all of the clinical decisions, and that includes exclusion from the caseload, which means dismissal. They're supposed to participate in the development of the IEP, and they're supposed to document direct and indirect supervision of the SLPA. That's a requirement that has to be done, and we have a form for that even, and that needs to be turned in at the end of the year. The proof that the supervision has happened, and without that proof, then we can't reauthorize at SLPA for another year. So it's really important that this situation be handled immediately. If you look at the ASHA's Code of Ethics, in 2006, that Code of Ethics was 2016. Individuals in administrative or supervisory roles shall not require or permit their professional staff to provide services or conduct research activities that exclude staff members' certification status, competence, education, training, and experience. So that's obviously an ethical violation. And they do have now, because they have the SLPA certification through ASHA, they do have a code of conduct now that came out in 2020 for SLPAs. And one of the conduct fundamentals is assistants shall engage only in those activities delegated by the supervising speech language pathologist and permitted by local, state, and federal guidelines. Well, according to regulations, so according to our regulations and our guidance, they are not allowed to dismiss students from therapy, write IEPs, or do any of those other things without supervision and without input from the supervising SLP. So now we're going to do one more time, brainstorm some solutions quickly, and then we'll move on through this process.
And Leanne, while people are doing that as well, I'll go ahead and put the link for the verification of attendance, since some people may be needing to leave right at 9 o'clock.
Okay, and we'll hopefully finish at 9. I don't think we'll have to discuss this a lot because it's going to be pretty obvious what needs to happen. So as the SLPA, I would share information about the requirements. I go directly to the therapist and remind them of the legal requirements before reporting to higher ups. I would share info about the requirements. If I do not have resolve, I would gain other employment. That's something we definitely don't want to see happen, and I'm sure county special education directors don't want to see happen either. So I'm hoping that as we go through these solutions, that you'll see that there are things that can happen. I would just make sure my supervisor was aware of the situation, because as a peer, I would not feel that it was my place to intervene, and talk to the therapist and may need to include the supervisor. So these are all great suggestions. Libby, do you have any in the chat box?
I do not.
Okay.
Oh, just have one. Ask supervising SLP to problem solve with the SLPA, including supervisor and building administrator.
Great. Those are all great solutions. They really are. And I think these are the solutions that I came up with. report the situation to the lead SLP or special education director, report the situation to the Department of Ed coordinator, and that would be me. If you have already gone through all the channels you can at your county level, then I would need you to call me and report it to me. Reporting things to the Department of Ed is not getting your county in trouble, and it would not be approached as that, but it is my responsibility to make sure that counties are providing services ethically and legally, and this is not that situation. So I would contact the special education director, tell them my concerns, tell them that the situation needs to be remediated, because it leaves the county wide open for many situations. Due process is one of them. That's not something we can allow to happen to counties. We need to try to prevent that. So that would be an option for you if that's your last resort, and definitely something you would do before you'd seek other employment. Talking to the supervising SLP and ignoring the situation and continuing to do the evaluations, dismissals, and write IEPs. I hope no one would continue to do that, because it's your professional career that's involved here. So I'm hoping that what you would choose to do would be to work for your supervising SLP, then follow the chain of command up to your lead SLP, the special education director. And honestly, special education directors a lot of times don't know these situations are going on. And if they do find out about it, they have options. They can do an extra duty contract. They can reduce one of the SLP's caseloads so they can have the time to do the supervision. They can hire a someone to do clinical supervision for the SLPA. And that can even be done during virtual means. So there are a lot of options. Please don't ever feel like you're trapped in that situation with no way out. And I think we can handle it positively and definitely not punitively as far as my end's concerned. So please don't ever be in that situation and feel like you can't reach out and that it's hopeless. And definitely don't let it make you seek other employment. 9 times out of 10, when you talk to the supervisor, you talk to the lead SLP, they'll be able to come up with a solution for you, or the special education director. So just know that even though this is a serious ethical issue and a legal issue, and a moral one, because it does bother you, there is a solution. So make sure to take that time and try to figure that out with your collaboratively, because that's what ASHA tasks us to do.
Selena Lucas suggested that you could maybe get another SLP to be the supervisor, or ask another one to be the supervisor. We're having some people are also having trouble with the link. I'm thinking that a lot of it has to do with being a guest. I'm not sure.
The survey?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm not sure. So here's the deal. If you can't access the link, then email me and I will send it to you in an email. We've got about 3 people, and most of them are from Kanawha.
Okay.
So, and Teresa, though, Morrison is not a guest, so I'm not sure. So I'm going to put it in there again, but what you would do is you would just click on the, or Control plus click. So if clicking is not working, then Control plus click on that link. And some people, Megan said that some people are having trouble statewide with the internet. So that could be an issue too. So don't worry if you're not able to access the survey. We do need that, because that needs to be completed in order for us to verify your attendance for ASHA and send you a certificate. And if you need Scantrons, Norma says if you minimize your page, it is behind the MT link if you have MacBook. So thank you, Norma. Appreciate that. But if you can't access it, don't worry. Just email me, and my email is on the screen, and I will send you a link. We will work it out. It's no problem.
And I just want to thank everyone for your participation this morning. I hope this was helpful as far as how we can work through the situations and work through the solutions and try to find a collaborative way to address all of these issues without letting them just stand and not do anything. but also not having to go straight to reporting things to ASHA, because that's not what ASHA tasks us to do. So thank you so much for the people who submitted these situations, and please feel free to reach out anytime you have questions. I can try to give you solutions to situations if possible, and I can also step in if you're not able to handle it collaboratively within your county. So thank you very much. Be sure you will get a copy of this PowerPoint, so you'll have it. And if you have any other questions, please be sure and email me. I'm sorry we ran over, but thank you so much, and we will see you soon.